So I'm just starting off by wetting hot press 300 grams paper. And I'm using this watercolour palette that I actually made myself by getting empty pans and sticking them in this plastic box that I purchased on Amazon. It was actually for a workshop that I was doing with some students, and we just squeezed our own paints in there. Some of these paints aren't available, and I will give you alternatives in the description below, but I'm using handmade watercolour paints that I was absolutely obsessed with a few years ago, and they're lovely. They've got all sort of little idiosyncrasies that I quite like, you know, all these wonderful things happening, i.e. granulation. So you could use a little bit of raw umber and burnt sienna for those colours there, or even burnt umber. And I'm actually mixing up a little bit of black with the brown here to create a dark colour. Now I'm using a plastic palette knife. You can use a plastic card as well, but I'm painting this thick paint onto those puddles of water there and just allowing the paint to do its own thing as well. And it's kind of out of my imagination, this a little bit. I did have a kind of a photograph, but completely went my own way. So you can just say paint some sort of distant rocks here and cliffs. And I'm just sort of painting very sort of gently, applying the tubed paint. It's freshly tubed paint from the homemade watercolour box there. And just painting these kind of really natural colours, wet into wet there. And sort of coming down a diagonal line as well to lead the eye into the painting. Why I quite like using hot pressed for the plastic card or palette knife technique is the paint sort of glides. It doesn't get stuck into the grooves of the paper. So you could actually use, again, something like light red for this colour here. It's a really rich sort of brick red colour. And I'm tilting here to allow the paint and the water to blend together and run together. I'm using just an old bristle brush here just to get the paint moving. As you can see there, you get some beautiful effects, just allowing the paint to run. So I'm doing very little brushwork here. I'm just allowing the paint to run, just letting it do its own thing, just waiting, hopefully, for that happy accident. Now I'm wetting the sky area here just with clean water, going back in with the plastic palette knife, getting out a lovely sort of Prussian blue colour, and I'm applying this wet into wet here in the sky area, and you can see the puddles of water just sort of allow that paint to kind of have a sort of mind of its own really. I'm just tilting. And you can just, you can see all those colours in the foreground are running as well there. I'm applying that thick sort of tube paint there, the thick blue, onto the sort of horizon area using the side of the plastic palette knife. And because the paint's very thick, it's not running too much, which is quite nice. I'm just applying a little bit more of that dark to the left there, damp into damp. And just using the side of the palette knife to create lovely thin marks. Just applying a little bit more dark here in the foreground. You could actually mix up a little bit of Payne's grey maybe with some violet. A little bit more of the Prussian blue here as well on the water's edge. A little bit more of the black or Payne's grey here, damp into damp to the left. And just using the palette knife to get a little bit more of the dark paint here. And remember, this is tubed paint. I'm just applying it now to the hills, damp into damp. A little bit more of the dark here, the Prussian blue. You could use phthalo blue or turquoise, a little bit more of that, which looks kind of like light red, which is a brick red colour. But you could use burnt sienna or burnt umber. And they go quite nicely together, these sort of blues and browns. And this is all damp into damp using the freshly tubed paint. And I do find it works best with this technique. But you could, if you wanted to, spritz your pans, if you don't have tubes, about half an hour before you use them. And they sort of moisten them up, but tube paint is the best. I'm using the pipette here, using water to apply it with the pipette, squeezing the water onto the surface and tilting, which is quite nice. I'm lifting off some light with the large brush. Here it's a damp brush. It's sort of soaks up the paint, creating lighter areas. And I'm scraping off some of the paint with a plastic card to create the look of rocks. The time to do this is when the paint is damp and not too wet. As you can see, I've got some lovely variations of marks. I'm also lifting off or swiping off with the plastic card some light in the water as well, and creating smaller rocks that are sort of on the sandy beach there as well. You can be so creative just with using a paper plate, a plastic card cut up, a few tubes of paint, a spritzer bottle maybe, a pipette, and a plastic knife or plastic palette knife to create something atmospheric and straight from you, from your imagination. If you like this content and you'd like to support the videos that I publish here on YouTube and want to get access to my weekly exclusive tutorials, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about the membership can be found in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.